2212, option 1. Thank you. Whether you are adapting to change or adapting for change, ADAPT, we're here for you.
Hello, my name is Tony Garcia. I'm the Executive Director for the South Texas High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program, a federal program designed to provide funding and support to our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners to combat narcotics trafficking. Part of our mission is to train our officers and the general public in prevention methodologies that can be used to keep our citizens and, more importantly, our children from using drugs in the first place. So, in accomplishing that mission, whether you are adapting to change or adapting for change, adapt. We're here for you.
The San Antonio Council on Alcohol and Drug Awareness, also known as HIDTA, is a not-for-profit organization serving the community since 1957. HIDTA provides youth prevention programs, adult and family services, information resources, and education to prevent underage alcohol use, tobacco use, marijuana use, and prescription drug misuse, and offer giving opportunities in Bexar County and 28 other surrounding counties in the South Central Texas Region 8 area. For more information, visit www.zacata.org or call 210-225-4741. Whether you're adapting to change or adapting for change, adapt. The Alamo Drug Awareness Prevention Team, we're here for you.
Whether you're adapting to change or adapting for change, adapt. We're here for you. Hello, I'm Sheriff Javier Salazar. Our mission here at the Bexar County Sheriff's Office is to enhance the quality of life in Bexar County by safeguarding the lives, rights, and property of all people, to include improving public safety by reducing the impact of crime through continued partnerships within our community. By participating in ADAPT, or the Alamo Drug Awareness and Prevention Team, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office actively works to prevent drug abuse in our community. The Sheriff's Office visits schools teaching youth what being a deputy entails, and we also train parents at these schools in drug awareness and what types of drugs children are becoming involved in, and what exactly to look for if you suspect your child might be using drugs. The Sheriff's Office also has taught local doctors, pharmacists, and medical personnel about the opioid crisis San Antonio is currently experiencing, in order to work together towards a common goal of drug prevention in our community. We want to thank ADAPT for our continued partnership, and we look forward to continuing to work with this amazing organization for many years to come.
Whether you're adapting to change or adapting for change, adapt. We're here for you. Hi, I'm Meredith Erickson. I'm the CEO of Alpha Home. We're here in San Antonio. We've been providing recovery support services since 1966. We have inpatient and outpatient programs. Our inpatient programs are for women only, and our outpatient are for both men and women, and we help support the entire family when someone is in recovery.
WestCare Foundation's motto is uplifting the human spirit. We do this in 18 states and 3 U.S. territories. We have over 1,600 employees, and our annual revenues is approximately $178 million. The services we provide is behavioral health, rapid response emergency services, senior care, capacity building training, substance abuse prevention and treatment, youth development, facility construction and maintenance, transportation, housing. We have prison management contracts. We also do crime and gang prevention. We have reentry services, and we do homeless services for vets. Whether you're adapting to change or adapting for change? Adapt. We're here for you. All right.
Darcel?
So happy New Year to everyone. I want to welcome you to ADAPT's Lunch and Learn series. And it is good to see all of you all. And as some of you have said to me, it's good to be seen. Today, we have a very interesting and informative discussion for you with the director and the deputy director of the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division and our own local hero, Mr. Tony Garcia, who is the executive director of the Office of National Drug Control Policies, South Texas, HIDTA, which is a high-intensity drug trafficking area. Today, you're going to be truly engaged, involved, and informed. And with that, we're going to turn this over to Eric, who is going to give us a little bit of our ground rules. Eric?
Hello, thank you very much. We are going to be providing CEUs for today's webinar. You'll get a link at the end and also in a follow-up email tomorrow that you can go to our website, fill out the evaluation and print off the certificate. Now, it works great 90% of the time, but if you have technical issues, let Darcel know and we'll be glad to send you that. Also use the chat box and please announce who you are and where you're from, and use the Q&A box for questions that we'll address at the end. We are just so thankful that we have great speakers today, and this is actually going to be on Facebook Live and also on YouTube, and so you can see it and share that at a different time. So thank you very much.
All right. That's it.
Did you say me?
Yes, Betsy, I did. Yes.
Okay. I am going to introduce our two speakers for the first part of this session. I closed it though, so give me one sec. Okay. Jim Burack is director of the Marijuana Enforcement Division of the Colorado Department of Revenue. Previously, he served as police chief and town administrator in Milliken, Colorado. His prior positions include U.S. Senate staffer in Washington, D.C., patrol officer in Westminster, Colorado Police Department, and counsel and director of operations with the Police Executive Research Forum, also in Washington, D.C. A U.S. Marine Corps Reserve Colonel, Jim's reserve tours included senior liaison officer to FEMA Region 8, staff judge advocate at Marine Forces Pacific Hawaii, and evaluation staff member at the Department of Defense, Inspector General at the Pentagon. Active duty tours include Civil Affairs Officer in Ramadi, Iraq in 2004 and 5, Civil Affairs Team Leader in Kosovo in 1999, and Military Prosecutor, Security Platoon Commander, and Special Assistant U.S. Attorney in Southern California. Jim holds an MA from the Graduate School of Public Affairs at the University of Colorado, Denver, a JD from the University of Colorado, and an AB from Dartmouth College. He is a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the Senior Management Institute for Police, and was an adjunct faculty member at the University of Northern Colorado. He is a member of the Colorado, California, and DC bars. Dominique Mendiola began her work in marijuana policy and regulation with the Colorado Department of Revenue's Marijuana Enforcement Division in 2014. She currently serves as Deputy Director of Policy, Licensing, and Communications. She manages rulemaking, licensing, and communications for the division. She also conducts legal and policy analyses, monitors and advises on policy matters, facilitates stakeholder engagement, and serves as the primary liaison between the Marijuana Enforcement Division and Governor's Office and other state agencies. She also serves as the on-camera spokesperson for the division. On July 5th, 2018, Governor John Hickenlooper announced Mendiola as the state's Director of Marijuana Coordination, where she provided cross-agency coordination and advised the governor and regulators on Colorado's adult use and medical marijuana industries. She served in this role for the remainder of his term. Mendiola received her political science degree from the University of Texas at San Antonio in 2009, and her law degree from the University of Denver Storm College of Law in 2012. Prior to joining the Marijuana Enforcement Division, she practiced law in Texas and Colorado with a focus in civil litigation.
We welcome Mr. Burack. Go
Great.
ahead.
Well, thank you so much. Should we go ahead and kick it off? Thank you, Betsy, for that welcome. I apologize for the lengthiness, but the important thing was that you heard that my colleague, Ms. Mendiola, is from San Antonio. So I just had to tell you, it is an immense privilege to be able to join you all today. It seems to me the opening comments that were referring to the terms of adapt and about change in some ways symbolize everything that Dominique and I have been working on as long as we've, each of us have been at the Marijuana Enforcement Division in Colorado now for 7 years. And it has been a world of adapting and changing. So it seems very appropriate. But in any case, thank you for the honor to be able to join you today. What I think Dominique and I are proposing to you today is we have a slide deck that we'd like to sort of hit the wave tops, if you will, and give you a sense of what regulated marijuana looks like in Colorado, recognizing that I think we have a very special relationship with you all as our neighbors in Texas, and a special responsibility I think we have to you as our neighbors. So what our expectation, I think, with that Dominique and I will share the slides as we sort of roll through here, and if there's the potential for it, we may be slightly informal as we switch back and forth, and make sure we hit the points that I think that you'd be most interested in. Dominique, I want to make sure that you give me the high sign and if you want to jump in. The initial terminology we use for Colorado's system is the track, taxed, and tested model. That's the Colorado model, and we think we've been successful. So let me just start off then. She's giving me the cue to jump to this first slide. Why, of course, is it complicated? Marijuana remains a Schedule I controlled substance under the CSA. I will tell you that we remain cognizant of the Cole memo. That was guidance that came from DOJ in 2013. But the principles of that Cole memo about protecting children, about reducing illegal activity around marijuana, what was outlined in the Cole memo still remains the priorities for us today. Major challenges for us: limited federal oversight, and that means that the panoply of federal agencies like EPA don't necessarily directly support regulated marijuana framework that we're working in. Very dynamic entrepreneurial industry, which can be a challenge at times, and we can talk a little bit about that. The lack of federal research, that some of the challenges are that federal law creates some hurdles for research historically on cannabis. Just a basic premise of how Colorado's framework is set up: it requires both state licensing and it requires at the same time local licensing. And we'll go to a slide that sort of points out the sort of why Colorado cannabis regulation might look different at the local level across the state. Hemp, of course, is now a major issue. I'm sure many of you are seeing the same issue. I know the executive director, Garcia, if I'm not mistaken, with HIDTA is probably seeing these very same issues with the sort of convergence and challenges that hemp production is now presenting. And it's all largely about hemp, and it's about CBD, and we can talk a little bit about that. So again, cannabis is that broad term that includes both marijuana and hemp. So that's the terminology that we're going to follow. So Dominique, we will slide to the next slide. And
yes, and Jim, before we do that, touching on a couple other things on this slide is you will hear us reference cannabis or marijuana throughout the presentation. You see on the slide, cannabis is really that umbrella term for both marijuana and hemp. And we usually refer to the umbrella term cannabis in informal settings, but marijuana is defined in our Constitution and in our state laws. So our reference in addition to understanding that in Colorado, we have a number of other agencies. The Marijuana Enforcement Division is part of the Department of Revenue. We're going to get into that in a later slide, but there are other departments across the state of Colorado who have critical responsibilities that involve cannabis. That's the Department of Transportation, Department of Public Health and Environment, Department of Agriculture, who oversees the cultivation of, regulates and oversees cultivation of hemp, of industrial hemp, and Department of Public Health and Environment, having responsibility over cannabis overall. We work very closely with all of our partners and other state departments, and that is, I think, part of the complexities involved here. In addition to that, lack of a federal framework, without a federal framework, that has really challenged our state to identify what sort of components need to be a part of a state program. For example, without FDA oversight, we have to consider, a testing program and related challenges in ensuring that we are identifying and filling any gaps that could create public health and safety risks and related issues.
This slide is the, I'm going to torture you with this slide for just a minute, which is really why Dominique forces me to speak to it, and then she can provide a little more color commentary. Here's one lesson learned from Colorado. It is the challenge of creating as simplistic or as simple a model as possible so that everyone understands how the system works. And it's taken, I think, some time for us to fully understand, for all of us as policymakers and law enforcement and others, to understand exactly how we have laid out the marijuana framework in Colorado. So just for a second, if you can bear with me, I'm just going to give you how basically Colorado has set this up. We've got basically, four of these or three of these funnels. The main funnel in the very center is the commercial regulated license space. That is the piece, that's the slice that Dominique and I have responsibility for. It has two sides of it. It has both a medical side and it has both this adult use or recreational side that we happen to call in Colorado retail. This is the predominant piece of marijuana activity and the economy that exists in Colorado. This is, and we'll go into later, this is cultivations and stores and manufacturers and that entire regulated system. But in addition to that, there are two other sort of major areas of legal marijuana activity in Colorado. One is we're going to start on the right side, which is that funnel that says personal grow. Under the Constitution, under Amendment 20 that passed in 2000 and Amendment 64, which was the right to a constitutional personal right to marijuana to grow six plants, that is both a constitutional right under that personal grow funnel. And then additionally, there's another sort of piece of that, which is this caregiver piece, which allows a caregiver on behalf of herself or himself plus 5 other patients to grow plants on their behalf. Again, outside of the commercial regulated space. The point is, though, that any transaction, any commercial transaction where money is exchanging hands needs to be within the commercial space. If it's not legally protected in one of these funnels, it's outside, where you'll see that we've denoted under illicit market activity. And this is really a fundamental concept, I think, in Colorado, is making sure that we all understand the pieces, how it operates, and create sort of that common operating picture for all of us. And as a law enforcement person, particularly and for law enforcement, so that we understand the bright lines between legal use and illegal use. And I will tell you, I think we've been pretty successful over time in trying to, if you will, funnel marijuana activity into that commercial regulated space, which we call, again, the tracked, taxed, and tested model. And we think there are benefits from that activity being there. So, Dominique, do you have some maybe some follow-up for what I've confused?
Sure. No, thank you, Jim. Our presentation is really going to focus in on that commercial funnel. So you'll see that there. So understanding the presentation will focus on the commercial regulated market. The personal grow funnel you see there, before we move on from it, just wanted to touch on some of the challenges that we've identified and works through as a state is for the personal grow allowance that Jim had touched on. Understanding there is a constitutional right in our state to for adults to possess and cultivate, grow up to 6 plants. One of the early challenges that we identified really touched in this area, where you could, for example, have multiple people in a household, each allowed to have 6 plants individually. Or if you're looking at the caregiver funnel, where you could have somebody representing that they're a caregiver, or a medical patient who's somebody who's been identified as a medical marijuana patient who has been provided an extended ounce or plant allowance by their registered healthcare provider. That really created some challenges for our law enforcement community, where you had somebody walking into a residence and what appears to be a very large operation, a cultivation, and a lot of confusion around what is and isn't legal. And you could have somebody representing that these are my plants that I'm cultivating pursuant to my constitutional right. It really created some challenges for the law enforcement community. So there have been some legislative developments around that to create a brighter line for law enforcement around what is and isn't legal activity as it touches in that on that funnel on the right. That limited the number of plants overall that somebody could cultivate, could have in a household to 12 plants, with some limited exception that a local jurisdiction could provide to exceed that amount for medical marijuana patients or caregivers. So it did create a brighter line there.
Okay, we're back. Okay, the torture is over, and thanks for bearing with us. But it's important, I think, to create that framework. So just I think Dominique referred to this earlier. We happen to be within the Department of Revenue. The executive director of the Department of Revenue is an appointee directly of the governor. In that role, he or she is also dual-hatted, if you will, as what we call the state licensing authority. It's effectively the equivalent of a board or commission. And in this case, that's the authority that he carries. Then we, as the Marijuana Enforcement Division, report up through the Department of Revenue. You can see we do licensing and investigations. Those are our primary pieces that is really our focus. But one of the lessons learned for us is that as we have sort of grown into this organization with a responsibility for stewardship over this new industry, is a recognition is that we need this broad set of skill sets and experiences to staff our agency. And so what you'll see there with these additional boxes of, we have a data team now of 5 real experts who crunch data for us. We have 2 scientists now on board. And so I think a lesson learned for us is make sure you have the people you need to do this responsibly, and to be able to create those lines of communication with all of our state partners, local agency partners, and stakeholders.
Thank you, Jim. And just one other thing to add here is as our agency has evolved, we have really expanded on the skill sets that we have brought into the agency. From, we have law enforcement personnel, criminal investigators, compliance investigators. We have, Jim mentioned, scientists on staff now. We have a data and analysis team, which has been really critical to being able to provide a transparency around, what does the market look like? What does the data show around cultivation trends? Or this also helps us monitor supply and demand related issues that we can respond to. So the ability to equip your agency with the right skill sets has been so valuable for us in supporting that transparency and data collection that allows us to continue to track what's happening and what other impacts might there be that we can respond to in a timely manner.
Let me just very briefly give you a sense. I mean, we think Colorado is a big state, but clearly not as big as you all. But we have 4 offices around the state. the reason we talk about this, it's just important because we have, as Dominique said, we have criminal investigators, we have licensing staff who are deployed, if you will, around the state to provide service. And of course, we want staff out there who, you know, certainly we've been impacted during COVID time with the limitations on our ability to be maybe as present as we'd like to be in our nearly 3,000 licensee businesses around the state. But nevertheless, this gives us the opportunity to create those local relationships with local licensing authorities. That means cities and counties and towns and their clerks' offices and you know, county commissioners, as well as those relationships with law enforcement, which are so key. We're of course the one other piece on this map is we do all business licensing out of Denver. We do what we call occupational, employee licensing from the field offices around the state. I think we good with that one?
So touching on, so Jim started touching on this already, but we license all businesses, all commercial marijuana businesses across the state. We also license their all owners, controlling owners, and every employee who works in a marijuana business. You can see here we have issued, we currently have approximately 40,000, a little over 40,000 licensed employees across the state. That does not necessarily mean you have that many individuals working in these businesses, but rather just licenses that have been issued. And oftentimes, for example, you will have somebody who's preparing to apply for a job and wanting to make sure they're checking the boxes ahead of time to ensure that they're properly licensed before they pursue that opportunity. So we conduct extensive investigations on owners and in looking at sources of funding for marijuana businesses before we issue licenses. There are a number of requirements set in statute and express prohibitions around ownership of a marijuana business in Colorado. And for employees, similarly, we conduct background investigations. Fingerprints are required. We do criminal background checks. And for owners, that would also expand on the background to include financial character, criminal character record, and related background.
Dominique, can I make one note on that slide, which is, even though we show, say, 42,000 folks that we badge, it doesn't mean necessarily that all 42,000 of those are FTE within the industry. Maybe that number is about 25,000 or thereabouts. That just means everyone who has a badge who is eligible to go work in a business. I will just say, as a lesson learned, I think for Colorado, the fact that we badge everyone, we provide sort of this requirement that we know who everyone is that is working in the business that could potentially touch marijuana. I think that's been one of the foundations for our success. Are we skipping to maps? That's the next up. Yeah, I mean, we use that 4P alliteration for people, places, product, and the focus obviously for our organization is we're really focused on cultivations and stores and manufacturers, those physical facilities around the state. Keep in mind, our organization, MED, is responsible from seed to sale, and that means at point of sale is where effectively our regulatory jurisdiction ends. I will say we have criminal investigators. Of course, we're post-certified police officers, about 40 of us with law enforcement powers.
Yes, and we'll touch more on the different license types of business, the types of businesses that are operating across the state, but there are extensive requirements around security, surveillance, and a range of different investigations that we conduct regularly to approach things on a risk-based manner. We're responding to complaints. We will just do random checks to determine compliance. We also look at compliance history to determine where we're focusing, and also look to the inventory tracking system that Jim mentioned, the seed to sale, as it's often referred to as seed to sale tracking system, that up to the point of sale, there are requirements to report every stage of that process for each business that allows us to track what's happening and then conduct analysis to determine, are there any anomalies there that would prompt us to to conduct an investigation or ask additional questions around what's going on.
I think there's one key piece of that we mentioned earlier. It's about dual control, if you will. That Colorado's framework requires both state licensing and local licensing. What that means in practice is that if you look at marijuana regulation from the ground up, from the local level, it is possible that that regulatory framework can look slightly different depending on where you're looking at it, because you're looking at it through that lens of any local regulation, and then of course that overarching state regulation. The point is, we have about 330 jurisdictions in Colorado between counties and municipalities. Cities or counties have the full authority to opt in to any combination of regulated marijuana that jurisdiction chooses. And so they can do a combination of stores or cultivations or manufacturers, both medical and retail. As a result, you have certain jurisdictions such as, say, Colorado Springs, for example. The city of Colorado Springs only allows at this time medical activity. There's no recreational or retail there. But the point is that about 110 or thereabouts jurisdictions, and that number continues to grow larger, typically during a new election cycle, that new jurisdictions will allow some type of regulated marijuana in that jurisdiction. And so this map is reflective of that layout.
And another maybe more current example of where we are likely to see more activity around local jurisdiction opt-in could be around marijuana delivery. We recently had legislation pass around marijuana delivery that allows for, initially last year, began medical marijuana delivery to private residences subject to local jurisdiction approval. So that would require a local opt-in in order for that to even be permitted, understanding that the state was required to implement a program and needing to be ready to accept applications for medical and now adult use beginning this year, marijuana delivery to a private residence. But that is, again, subject to local jurisdiction approval. So we may see some more activity around allowances, particularly in the world of COVID, where folks are looking to delivery services more generally and more often now. So that is something we are continuing to track and monitor. Beginning January 1, just this month, we began accepting applications for adult use, or retail as it's referred to in Colorado, but also known as recreational marijuana, to private residences. So the business licenses that we issue, this gives you a picture of the various types of operations that are happening across the state. You have your storefronts, cultivations. Infused product manufacturers are those, as you think of edibles, but not limited to those types of products. That are infused products manufacturers are working on, and this just works through the whole supply chain here. We have testing facilities that we license. We have a testing program we will touch on later in the presentation. And so before any inventory, any marijuana inventory makes its way to a storefront for sale to a consumer, there are a number of different testing requirements that need to be done or complied with prior to that inventory making its way to a store. And testing facilities must be independent. If somebody owns a testing facility, they are not permitted to own and operate any other business type to ensure that independence. Operators are, as you think of any of these other business types, an operator could potentially step in as part of a management agreement to provide some services, some management related services to any of these other license types you see here. Transporter licenses are the business to business. Initially, this is how it was developed, as a license that could be issued to somebody who just wanted to provide those transportation services to allow for the transportation of marijuana between business types. So a cultivation who has harvested their inventory and it's ready to go to a manufacturing facility to be manufactured into edibles. That's where those businesses could certainly, if they wanted to transport that inventory on their own, they could do that, but they could also look to the services of a transporter for that purpose. You have hospitality establishments. This was an allowance in recent years. We have not seen a whole lot of activity around that, likely related to COVID. But there is an allowance for the issuance of a hospitality license. This provides two different options. There's a hospitality and sales business that would allow for somebody to provide a place for people to purchase marijuana and consume it on site, or just a hospitality alone that does not allow for sales, but rather allows for just a place to come and consume. That type is also allowed to be mobile. So think your party bus scenario. This is also subject to local approval and an area that, because it's still relatively new, that we are monitoring closely and will continue to do so. We have research and development. There's one research and development facility that has been issued, but allows for research and development on a range of matters. So we're continuing to track that, and then we touched on delivery. But you could see we have right under just a little under 3,000 licenses that have been approved across the state. Jim, anything to touch on there?
We're good. Should we check in with Betsy and just,
Yes.
Beverly, are you driving? Tell us
Right.
what we got, because we can recalibrate and hit the wave tops so we can, leave a couple minutes.
Thank you
I
so
see some
very
good
much,
questions.
because I'm so glad you did that, because we've got a flurry of questions. You guys have generated so much interest. So if you wouldn't mind, if we can take a couple and then you guys can wrap it up. But I know people really want to get their thoughts in. So here, I'm going to just give you a couple of the really good questions that have come up. They're all great. But someone had said, they said, what might be the primary reason that someone would choose, now that marijuana is legal, why would they choose the illicit side of this business? And so to that end, has the crime rate gone down in terms of drug trafficking overall, or just drug trafficking of marijuana?
I didn't know whether Dominique wanted to jump in. There's a bunch of complexity to a number of these questions. I think most certainly crime related to marijuana has clearly dropped. Let me back up though to one major, I think, another sort of lesson learned about what I think we've created in Colorado, because it goes, I think, to the central point of that question. And that was, what we're really trying to do is trying to take illicit activity and move it into the licensed regulated space where it's transparent, and where arguably it's that tracked, taxed, and tested marijuana. And I think what we've tried to do is we've tried to create incentives, market incentives, to move that activity into the licensed space. In other words, you create product which is fully tested in our testing facilities. You create product that's safer because it is packaged and labeled appropriately. It's being created in cultivations where they are following all the required safety practices that we require, and that there's additional oversight from our Department of Public Health and Environment, not to mention local authorities who are also looking at it. So I think that's the larger picture here, about trying to create incentives that I think we've been successful in Colorado in moving that into the tracked, taxed, and tested space. Dominique, you got more on that one?
Sure, and just Jim touched on the testing piece. I think that's really important, that you have testing requirements and other standards that are in place for these facilities that are intended to ensure that there's an environment in which this inventory is being cultivated in or manufactured in, that tracks with health and safety standards. And we are always looking to best practices and engaging with industry members as a part of that to ensure it's collaborative, but also ensuring that the framework that we're establishing is an operable framework. There are a lot of requirements around surveillance, security, reporting, and otherwise, but we are always needing to ensure we're not establishing a framework that is so burdensome that somebody just decides that they're going to look to the illicit market to conduct the activities that they're wanting to conduct, when we have a pathway in a transparent way to do it. So we can, and some of the later slides touch on some of the impacts, so we can hit on that later.
That would be great. And this one, and I'm gonna do this one, then we're gonna let you guys get back, and then we'll take some more in just a few minutes. But one of the things is, and this goes to that a little bit of what you were saying, Dominique. Okay, so obviously there's an age limit to where you cannot buy it. Is that 18 or 21 or?
21 for adult use or recreational, as it's often referred to. So 21 for.
So the question to that is, so have the rates, it would be illegal for everybody under 21. So has that gone up in terms of the illegal trade, dealing to everyone who's under 21? Because the money is in the illegal trade.
So that, I think there are some complexities in there that might make it challenging to provide a direct response to that, but just touching on the fact that we have, whether it's legal or not, if somebody's under 21, remember we also have a medical marijuana framework that allows for medical marijuana patients who may not be 21. It could allow for somebody 18 years old to go into a medical marijuana store if they have been provided a recommendation by their physician and are registered in the system. Then somebody 18 years old could go into a facility to purchase. So it's not necessarily a matter of whether somebody's 21 or not. It also touches on the amount that somebody's possessing, that touches on constitutional allowances and rights. And then also in the law, there are certain possession limits and sales limits that would apply. So it's not a question that we could answer that easily without touching on all those complexities.
Very good. You guys want to let you go back to your slides, and then we're going to take some more questions a little bit later. Go ahead.
Great.
Dominique, if you'll let me just attack the inventory tracking or piece here. This we would think is one of the sort of foundational pieces of Colorado's success. We have an RFID barcode system that you can see in front of you. What that essentially means is once a plant becomes a mature plant, and actually we're tracking them before that, even when they're typically coming from clones. We use these tags that will remain as a plant tag, and then harvest batches later, where we use these yellow tags for medical, blue for retail or adult use. And what this essentially does for us is it creates accountability in the system for all the production and the supply chain of marijuana. Medical and retail, keep in mind, are essentially two separate supply chains. Although I think over time we may see some efforts to try to create some efficiencies in that supply chain between both medical and retail. But the essence of this is it creates accountability. It means that when we, for example, find that maybe there was some product that should not have gone out into the marketplace because it may have been contaminated in some way, say with pesticides or with a solvent, for example, we have the ability to go back in our metric system, which records all of these events as it goes through the supply chain and then is sold, that we're able, using those inventory tracking numbers, that we can go back and determine where all that product was sold and issue a health and safety advisory to recommend that product be returned to the store. But this has been an important system, I think, for Colorado's success.
Yes, and it's also supported local law enforcement in a way that if there are, for example, if there's an investigation or a case around diversion and somebody has taken marijuana across state lines and you have information that's on a label, the inventory tracking system allows us to identify certain information if it's displayed on a label, if certain marijuana has been seized. We could actually track it through a system to see where that where it went through the supply chain and identify the businesses that would have been involved, because we also have an interest in identifying whether there is any tie to one of our regulated marijuana businesses if there was, for example, a seizure of marijuana out of state.
And Dominique reminds me, it takes me back 6 years to a case that involved our law enforcement partners in Texas, where indeed that's exactly what happened. They recovered at a crime scene. There was material that had tags from Colorado. We were able, of course, to go right back into our computer system, generate the data that showed exactly where it came from. And I think we're able to provide important data for DEA and our local task force folks in your state.
Okay.
So we can just, Dominique, we'll just try to do a hit and run on some of these. This is probably a better one for you, but bottom line is we have in-depth packaging and labeling requirements. That is our universal symbol in the state of Colorado that denotes that a product has THC in it, which is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana.
Yeah, so in just looking at products broadly, there are different types of inventory that that are involved here. You have flour, concentrates, edibles, and as we look at products, that could include edibles. As you see here, we have a universal symbol requirement. Every serving size, as you see on the picture there, is limited to a certain milligram content for THC. It also, every serving size must have the universal symbol displayed on it. In addition to on the label of the container holding the marijuana, there are, we've developed with the guidance from the General Assembly here, regulations to really focused around preventing youth use and other and related risks. So I touched on the serving size restrictions for adult use marijuana. Serving sizes are limited to 10 milligrams or less THC, and the entire product, if you're looking at that candy bar, for example, cannot exceed 100 milligrams total per that entire unit. Every serving size needs to be easily separated. If it cannot, then that product cannot exceed 10 milligrams total. And the prohibition, we've also had legislation that prohibited edibles in the shape of a human, animal, or fruit, think like Sour Patch Kids, so as to not be appealing to children. So any edible in the shape of a human, animal, or fruit is expressly prohibited in Colorado from being manufactured by our businesses. There's also child-resistant packaging requirements that apply, and this is something that between that and labeling that has evolved over time, where developments that we've seen are around layers of packaging. Think your nesting doll scenario. That's how we've described it before, where we've had to clarify the requirement, whereas really it's intended to be on that innermost container that's holding the marijuana, to ensure that we don't have scenarios where all of those labeling requirements are on that outermost container when you have layers of packaging in some instances where that external outermost layer is most likely to be discarded following purchase. So we really worked with our stakeholders to clarify those requirements to ensure that we are protecting public health and safety. We also had, prior to 2014, some edibles were indistinguishable from regular food products you might see on the shelves of a regular store. So this prompted efforts to ensure products could be easily identified. So I touched on the universal symbol, but also prohibiting the use of a commercially manufactured product. Consider certain type of product you might just purchase and then spraying it to infuse it, that would not be allowed in our state. You see we have other public or public safety requirements, surveillance, edibles legislation we touched on. We do conduct underage compliance checks. There are advertising restrictions. I think we had a question around that touched on commercials. We can back at that to see if we can touch on that further. But the advertising requirements have evolved as well relatively recently. We just there's now we're distinguishing between branding and advertising. That was some legislation that passed recently. We're still navigating that, but there is a need for us to work very closely with our local partners, because there are also advertising requirements, of course, at the local level. And that's where we're really looking to rely, is ensuring that we have our state requirements, but they are also subject to any local requirements or prohibitions.
How are we doing on time?
I do want you all to know that we need to be wrapping up because we do want to be able to make sure that we can also hear from Mr. Garcia. So we're pretty much at that time.
We can wrap up. Just wanting to touch on one last piece here. We have on our, let me see, here we go. Public education. You'll see that Colorado has made efforts to and has been really successful around developing public education campaigns. You'll see as an example, bud tender tips, working, and this has also been in collaboration with industry members. It's really needed to, it's a requirement to ensure that we are, it's so critical to ensure we're collaborating and successful around our outreach and education efforts. Jim, anything last you want to touch on?
Yeah, and if I can, and then maybe this provides the proper transition to the executive director of HIDTA, and that is another lesson learned, I think, for Colorado is the importance of I think, as Dominique talked about, certainly stakeholder and coordination across all of state and local government and all of our stakeholders and working with industry. But an essential component of that is working with law enforcement. And so I can tell you, working closely with our colleagues at the HIDTA in Colorado, Rocky Mountain HIDTA has been critical. One thing we've done successfully in Colorado, we set up what we've called the MILE meeting, which is the Marijuana Interagency Law Enforcement meeting. That is a meeting that we had been regularly meeting. It's co-chaired by the executive director of our Colorado Department of Public Safety, who oversees our Colorado State Patrol, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and all the criminal justice agencies within the state. And then the other co-chair is myself with MED. And so the intent is to bring together federal, state, and local law enforcement to have those policy and operational, have an opportunity for some of those questions that certainly come up working in a new law enforcement environment like marijuana. And so I think that's been another success story that we've pioneered in Colorado.
So to both of you all, I absolutely want to thank you all so very, very much. I do. There are just so many questions. I think that ADAP may want to really reconsider bringing you guys back and doing a full session with you, because there are so many questions that I think are really very, very rich. So at this point, I want to be able to introduce Mike Drumgoole, who is going to actually introduce our next speaker. Mike.
Thank you, Beverly. It's my pleasure to introduce Executive Director Tony Garcia. We've known each other since the dark ages, 1978. Anyway, he's a director of the South Texas High Intensity Drug Trafficking area. Consists of 15 counties, runs from Brownsville to Del Rio, including Bexar County and Travis County, which is Austin. Our focus is dismantling drug trafficking organizations, money laundering organizations, information sharing, working with our state and local and federal partners, which we have 81 agencies participating. Director Garcia has 31 years of prior law enforcement with the Texas Department of Public Safety, retiring as a deputy commander in 2007. He abandoned the state for about 18 months, went to New Mexico to be the executive director of the HIDTA there, and found his way back to God's country 18 months later. So he's a native Texan, married, 2 daughters, good friend of mine, and I enjoy the opportunity that I have to spend time with him. Director Garcia.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that introduction, and to our partners and friends in Colorado, Director Burack and Director Mendiola, thank you so much for your presentation. I got to say that our hats go off to you. You are not only dealing with something that is so challenging, but you're dealing with something that has on both sides of the aisle pluses and minuses. And my hat's off to you for the efforts that you have placed in trying to deal with this situation. Understanding that the panacea would be that every time that marijuana is sold and dealt with in Colorado, that it's done under your supervision would be fantastic. However, in the law enforcement community, especially Director Burack, you can attest to this, that that's not the case. And so, again, my hat's off to you, and we applaud you for your efforts, and I hope that you can come back and visit with us again. What is the HIDTA? Simply put, as Mike covered a little bit, is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program, a program under the Office of National Drug Control Policy that goes to attacking drug problems in the state of Texas, across the country. If you go to the next slide, what we do is we fund task forces to conduct combat narcotics. Currently, there are 33 different designated HIDTAs across the country, to include Hawaii and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Recently added was Alaska, and so we're expanding our efforts into Alaska. Go to the next slide, please. There are 4 currently designated HIDTAs in Texas. We, as Mike said, are down in South Texas, covering from Del Rio, Valverde County, down to Brownsville and Cameron County, and including Bexar and Travis County up in Austin. If you go to the next slide, I'm gonna try and speed this up for you, Beverly. These are our 15 counties. We currently have 78 now, up to 81 federal, state, and local agencies that participate. And those are only the law enforcement agencies that are participating in our program. If you go to the next slide. So as of, we're seeing some good things. In calendar year 2019, which is the way we track our statistics, in South Texas alone, the HIDTA was responsible for the 69,000 kilos of marijuana that were seized. That was action. As our stepped up and COVID came about in 2020, as well as the mitigation of commercial travel back and forth across the borders, and to some degree the building of some areas of the wall, we have got our marijuana seizures down to 46,000, which is a 32% decrease from 2019. Can we go to the next slide? So this is something for the benefit of the folks that are not in the law enforcement community. Very simple. The phase 1, drugs come into the state of Texas, whether it's across the border or with Mexico, or across the borders with our neighbor states. They consolidate those loads in what we know as stash locations. They then go out to regional distributions within the state that are done by the cartels and their liaisons and distributors. They then distribute those drugs to the local level, and of course at the end it ends up with the phase 5, which is the consumption rate, and from there then the illegal monies that are derived as a result of that then make their way back to the organizations that sent the drugs in. Next slide, please. So here's a concern that we have, that in South Texas, just of our 15 counties alone, out of those, 22% of those adults seeking treatment in Texas for marijuana. 20% of those youths under 18 seeking treatment in Texas for marijuana use. The most recent data available that we have from the Centers of Disease Control was that we had in 2019 47 deaths that can be attributed to the use of cannabis and its derivatives as reported here in Texas. Next slide, please. The potency, growing up, and Mike kind of dated us a little bit, Beverly, I'm sorry, but you know, the marijuana back then, the potency rate of marijuana was in anywhere around the 4% content. Today, in some of the legalized states, Colorado is one example, that potency rate is more than 15. And some of these people advertise the fact that their concentrated levels can be sold to the degree of 95% THC, which is critical for us and concerns for the well-being, because there's so much studies that are still lacking, so much reviews to understand that. One of the things, a report that I read, thank you to Director Burack, is the report that is provided by the Marijuana Enforcement Division that covers a lot of these things of what they are seeing in Colorado and what we hope to mitigate here in the state of Texas, God forbid, should that legalization come through. Because the major concern has always been either the overconsumption or the accidental consumption by some of those children. Colorado has taken those steps, as you saw earlier in the slides, where they're trying to make sure that the cookies or the gummies are not designed in such a fashion that would entice a child to get a hold of them. However, the accidents still occur. The parent that has bought them for recreational use may not be paying close attention, and it gets diverted to the child itself. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we wanted to cover today, and I'm trying to speed it up here, as challenges for law enforcement in the state of Texas primarily, is we are seeing in some of our counties what we call a decriminalization taking place, so that there's no longer an action for the illegal action that takes place. So there's no consequences. We have a very difficult time here in administering presumptive tests for the marijuana intoxication. So unlike other states, we do not have a DUI specific law. We have a DWI law in which the use of drugs is included in that. The problem is that unlike for alcohol use, when you can request, and by law we demand that they submit to a breath alcohol content exam, we can't do that for somebody that we believe may be under the use of marijuana. And so there's no breath alcohol or breath content that can be examined. The problem that we have now in seizures of THC liquids that are coming into the state of Texas, both from across the border in Mexico and from the legalized states as California, Colorado, Washington, and primarily Oregon, is a big problem for us as well. We've seen a major increase in the use of our parcel carriers to conduct the delivery service of the marijuana that is being diverted from some of these legalized states. So our friends and partners at the United States Postal Inspection Service, as an example, are having difficulty because of the lack of staffing that they have available to be able to divert all these packages that are illegally shipped out of legalized states into those states that do not have the legal marijuana use. And they shop for these in particular because of the high levels of THC content that both the flower and the concentrates offer to the would-be user here. Next slide, please. Again, continuing on some of our challenges, in the San Antonio area alone, the number of packages that have been received or interdicted by our law enforcement partners here in San Antonio, whether it's through USPIS or UPS or FedEx, 99% of those have resulted in the seizure of weapons in those particular areas, which is very concerning for us in law enforcement because of the propensity of use of violence against us and against other drug dealers. Along the border, we are seeing continual increase in the use of juveniles to move, to smuggle drugs into the country and to transport it from the border to central areas such as San Antonio and Austin. We have an increased degree of marijuana intoxicated driving that has increased crashes and fatalities. In 2019, the Texas Department of Transportation reported over 24,000 DWI crashes, which resulted in 812 fatalities. The drug trafficking organizations continue to use private and public lands to compete with legal states' production and diversion. These folks, if you go to the next slide, continue to use these things with unregulated use of pesticides, herbicides that are causing then contamination and pollution of water and supplies. Colorado has been an example for us in how they go about ensuring that those areas of production and even those that are clandestine in their state are more strictly regulated and watched over by folks at MED and other law enforcement agencies in Colorado, which is something that we'll need to start here in Texas if in fact we go in that direction. The federal lands that we have in Texas are not as vast as those as are in Colorado, but we still have those, especially in the piney woods of East Texas, where in years past, that was one of the largest production areas for marijuana, illicit marijuana grows in Texas. Then we're finding our folks that at the user amount, they said, well, we can extract our own THC out of these things. And they start to use these explosive, highly combustible solutions, whether it's butane, the propane, or ethanol, to extract that THC out of it. And we've been lucky so far that we have had a minimal number of either fires or explosions that have taken place as a result of that. And then we are preparing ourselves for an increase in household and child abuse because of the psychotic episodes that the continual use of marijuana has shown to bring upon those users themselves. Next slide, please. But then we look at it because we have a prevention program within the state of Texas and our partners in the prevention and treatment organizations. We started to look at this presentation as a way to let you know about what we believe are some of the challenges. How do the teachers, how do the counselors, how do the folks that are having to deal with those people that have a propensity for use are going to identify the youth at risk? How do they provide a safe space where they can feel free to come in and talk to us and say, this is what's happening to me and this is the help that I'm needing? How do we reach then criminal justice clients, the ones that have already been in the courts, that are they're seeing their own personal challenges of detoxification, mental disorders, or even the loss of their job skills because they're no longer working and can't find housing assistance. These are some major things that are coming up as concerns for us in the prevention realm. Again, staying informed of new and emerging other substances and trends that are happening as a result. If you go to the next slide. SAMHSA in 2019 found that 44% of these 12th graders have been reporting a lifetime use of cannabis. And I can't see it. I just don't understand how that is going to benefit them as adults once they come out of high school. Individuals in the lower socioeconomic status here, we note that are 1.6 times more likely to become highly users of marijuana. And the sad part is that it's predominantly sold, at least in Texas, in the Black and Hispanic communities more than anything. If you go to the next slide, please. I put these together. I can tell you that for the most part, these are Tony's facts. I'm not going to put this on everybody else, because I do not intend to enter into the debate format. I think that it's critical for us to see what we in law enforcement believe to be the facts. And that is, I'm sorry, but marijuana legalization is not going to help the disadvantaged communities. I think that it is sold as a way to help those communities to expand social equity programs, and it's not happening because why? Big pot, just like big tobacco back in the 30s, is nothing more than worried about the profit. What happens to the addiction industry continues to grow, and an attack goes after those low-income neighborhoods. The black market in legal states has in fact increased. That is why Dr. Burack had to show us that slide in which there is that illegal activity. They recognize it, other states recognize it, and we do too. In Michigan, just in Michigan alone, the near deadly marijuana use in 8th graders has increased by 85%. Next slide, please. In Texas, we've seen, again, as you saw earlier, that stone driving is going to go up. The non-payment of services provided when you show up at an emergency room is going to increase. Where's that going to go? It's going to pass on to the taxpayers. Marijuana as an accepted use is going to have a detrimental effect on the working environment because lesser people are going to start worrying about doing drug testing. In homes that we have rated in years past and even recent, where you have marijuana grows that are taking place, you find mold and other hazardous chemicals making that house or property unlivable, and in turn, you cannot sell it. If you go to the next slide. I think that for us in Texas, more importantly than anywhere else, if we follow CADCA 7 strategies, I think that we can make some inroads in ensuring that primarily our youth, whom are the ones that we need to be more concerned with than anything else, is provide them the information, help them build their skills, provide them the support, reduce those barriers, change some of the consequences. Let's look at these folks and say, these children that are abstaining from the use of drugs, marijuana included, alcohol and tobacco, let's give them those incentives that we want them to continue to stay away from. The physical design, as Colorado has done, you ban the designs of any program that is available to go out there that entices these children to start experimenting with some of these drugs. And more importantly, you start looking at modifying and changing policies on how to deal with these folks. So here are some resources, and Director Burack alluded to it earlier. Down at the bottom is the impact on marijuana legalization. You can go through the RockyMountainHIDTA.org to obtain a lot of information. I tell you that they have their reports as well in there. The National Marijuana Initiative, which is a national program that we have, if you go to theirs, the Marijuana Enforcement Division posts their reports and records on that program as well. And of course, our South Texas HIDTA Prevention Initiative, our contact, Mr. Rick Saldana, who is our new prevention and coordinator for South Texas, is available to anybody for any resources that you might need. Go to the next slide, please. So in conclusion, what can I say? It's always been about the partnership. It has to be about the partnerships between law enforcement, our prevention, our treatment, our schools, our educators, our counselors. All of these partnerships are what is going to help us keep these children safe. And I know that I keep harping on children. That's the end game here, is we want to grow a next generation of children that are not susceptible to the use of drugs, regardless of what kind of drug that may be. And so we keep pushing for the see something, say something information as it applies for law enforcement. Beverly, this has been a pleasure for me. I'm sorry that I had to rush it, but I think that it was important for us to hear what Director Burack and Director Mendiola had to offer. And I truly hope that they can come back and take a full time themselves. And if there is a little bit of time, Beverly, I'll entertain any of your questions.
Well, I want to just tell you, Tony, that was amazing. Again, once again, I love listening to you, and you summarized so very quickly. And you did, and by doing that, you did leave. Truly, we have some time. We've got, about 15 minutes that we can actually, maybe about 10 minutes that we can take some more questions. And I think you actually hit on a number of points that people were actually putting into the box in terms of why this may not work for sure here in Texas. And so let me get some of these other questions. And so one of the things, all three of you all, please I'm going to be pitching questions to you all. So to our Colorado guests, do you expect to see that marijuana is going to be the next big tobacco, like big tobacco 2.0, that we will see with marijuana, and then have some of the same issues we had in terms of trying to get people to stop smoking? Either one, Jim, Dominique.
I can, Executive Director Garcia, it was terrific to hear, the perspectives that you're seeing here in Texas. And I just want to reiterate again, Colorado's sort of special responsibility to our neighbor about some of the issues that we need to work on together, in this current framework where, marijuana from Colorado that's regulated, it needs to stay in the state of Colorado. And so I know we've had ongoing conversations with our law enforcement partners in Texas, and appreciate all that you're doing. One thing I will say though is the importance of data. the importance that I think we in Colorado, which in some ways is sort of, it's a teachable moment, if you will, certainly for Colorado, but it gives you all, as you all think about what the future of, or think about cannabis policy long-term, is it gives you an opportunity to look around the country and look to people, look to us in Colorado, and to see where we've hit the mark and where we've had some challenges. And one of those places, I think, is in that data collection piece, in truly understanding what the impacts are. And I think we've done a few good things in Colorado. We put something, the General Assembly put something in statute that made sure that there was someone at the Department of Public Safety, in Division of Criminal Justice, trying to pull in all of that data for all of these impacts so that we could truly understand what are the baselines and what is marijuana activity, and what are those impacts, social impacts, what is it doing with kids? And we've been very diligent about collecting data through the public health department, through the various surveys, to try to see what those use rates are. Dominique may be able to. I think what we've basically seen is that the basic lesson learned that we've seen is that use rates in Colorado have stayed relatively constant over time. I think that's the takeaway for us. But again, I would say Texas is in a place where you can look to us in Colorado, who've pioneered many of these concepts, to see where we've had some challenges and where I think we've created some success.
So let me just jump in here and ask this question because I think I'm not sure that you answered it. Do you anticipate seeing marijuana turning into sort of like the next big cigarettes? Then we'll certainly find that there's going to be health risks to that. And do you see that happening?
It's probably a much more complex question that me as the director in the Marijuana Enforcement Division probably can't speak to directly. But I can give you a couple data points that I think are interesting for us to contemplate. Something we do in Colorado every year now. We work with the University of Colorado. They do a market study for us. They look at different aspects of the industry, take a step back, look at the data, and see what they're telling us. Something that came out of a report that was released in last year showed that the level of competition, the level of lack of centralization, if you will, a consolidation in the industry, still remain relatively high. Certainly, we have a number of larger operations that represent a number of licensees. Even as I think we're starting to see some national ownership. Colorado, Dominique is the expert on this, on what we're seeing for the potential for corporate ownership in publicly traded companies, et cetera, in Colorado. So we're starting to see that trend certainly. But what we certainly see though in Colorado, and the data bore this out last year, was that there's still a real sort of decentralization or a lack of or continued sort of steady state on ownership in Colorado. What I could also say though is I think that our operators, for the most part, they follow the rules. They're responsible. I think they recognize with us. Executive Director Garcia pointed out, I think, a fundamental tenet of everything that we've really been focused on. It's that piece about children and about youth, the youth effects. And I think that's a place that we've been very conscious about. And I think all of the stakeholders in Colorado have paid attention to that, including our responsible industry partners.
So Dominique, let me ask this question. Are internet sales allowed?
Internet sales, yes, it just depends. So for medical marijuana, as far as conducting make the sales transaction, there is an express prohibition for adult use marijuana transactions to occur on the internet. If somebody wanted to make payment on the internet, for example, there is an express prohibition in the statute for adult use or recreational. That does not apply to medical. So it would allow for the transaction to be conducted, but it's not it doesn't open the door to allowances around mailing or anything like that. That it still needs to be an in-person transaction. It's just that somebody could order for pickup and then make the payment online.
So again, Director Garcia, so that blows my mind that you can order it through the internet. So how do you track, how will the HIDTA track customers from out of state or customers going from Texas to Colorado and then coming back in? I mean, how do you all doing that now?
Well, it's a challenge, Beverly, because although the state of Colorado does not allow that to occur by their regulations, the illicit market is still making it happen. So our interdiction officers that work the Panhandle, that work Oklahoma, that work Kansas, New Mexico, and Arizona are all aware of the fact that vehicles coming out of Colorado may have a propensity for hauling or carrying illicit marijuana that is being brought into the state of Texas for sale here. It becomes even more difficult when they can go onto the internet, and not just in Colorado, but I'm talking about Oregon and California and Washington. And then more importantly, you reach out to Canada, you reach out to India, you reach out to China. And all of these drugs can be ordered via the internet, not just marijuana, but all kinds of drugs. Fentanyl, as an example, can be ordered over the internet and shipped directly to your home. So when our partners at USPIS, which is the only law enforcement agency in the parcel industry, are so strapped with lack of personnel and lack of resources, it makes it difficult. I can't say that we're not going after it. We are. We're establishing partnerships, increasing our partnerships with them in the form of task forces and environments throughout, trying to attack that problem. But it's a very daunting challenge for us to control.
So here's another quick question to you, Tony. It says, can you speak to the prevalence of marijuana being grown in East Texas? We have 2 coalitions that cover this area, and we've seen many youth report heavy use of marijuana there.
Marijuana use or marijuana grow in East Texas has always been and will continue to be primarily in the what we call the deep thicket or the piney woods of the government properties and government lands in East Texas. They continue to grow, but then they're finding, why should I get into this risky business of doing something illegal here when all I have to do is find me a connect in a legal state and have it shipped in. So I can't give you an exact number. I can find that out for you if you want through the threat assessment from our Houston HIDTA.
Wow. So you guys, so someone has actually said, again, does Colorado have any statistics on marijuana poisoning as a result of legalization?
So that, Jim, looks like you're going to jump in, but I did share a link to a report that provides a range of data on marijuana impacts. That is a data point that wouldn't come directly out of our agency, but rather our partners at the Department of Public Health and Environment. So I hesitate to speak on that, understanding that we're not representing the Department of Public Health here, but there is information in that report that may be useful to address that question.
And so for people who are working in the industry, is if they have felonies, are they allowed to, so this goes to the employees, not to the owners, but is there any regulation about who can actually work as an employee in the industry?
Yes, there is. So, and this has evolved over time. Initially, when our framework was first established, there was an express prohibition from anybody to get a license. If somebody had, it was a 5 and a 10-year prohibition. If it was a felony, from the date of application, if somebody had a felony on their record within 5 years, they were prohibited from being issued a license. If it was a drug felony, then it was a 10-year prohibition. That has since evolved to now just be a straight across the board 3-year prohibition for any felony, with some limited exception as a part of our social equity program that was recently established through legislation and is still underway.
So I just have a question. Is one of the main reasons or the arguments for legalization is that it somehow is going to be better for minorities? Is that sold? Is that one of the arguments used in Colorado?
I can't say that that's an argument that we've made. Really, the social equity program that we're still developing through direction from our General Assembly has been a part of looking at the regulated market today. What is the what is the makeup of the current industry, and where might there be barriers to entry from folks who may have an interest in participating in the commercial regulated market, but has been prohibited due to issues around the war on drugs.
Beverly, could I address one question in the chat, because I thought it was a really thoughtful question that might be worth exploring just a bit. I think it was Ms. Jarvis put something in here about just about revenue generation, because it seems to me it may be relevant for many of the folks on this call, and wondering how do we respond to maybe some of the challenges that legalization have created. Let me just give you some very rough numbers. Between the medical and retail sales over the course of, say, 2020, sales will be somewhere in the vicinity, in the commercial regulated space, somewhere between about 2 billion, probably in the 2.3 billion. That will generate at the state level revenue somewhere in the order of about $400 million. What that money has been able in part to provide is money that goes into the marijuana tax cash fund. Dominique knows this very well, because she at one time was Governor Hickenlooper's director of marijuana coordination. But the idea is that money in many ways has funded and offset or been able to address programs like that she mentioned, public education pieces that talk about that address some of those youth harms, funding the Department of Public Health and Environment, even funding things like transitional housing in Denver that I recall was an initiative a few years ago. Just for your information here, the operations of the Marijuana Enforcement Division are entirely funded through fees that are paid for by our licensees, businesses, and individuals. But the idea, of course, is that there is revenue generation that it can address some of these larger concerns, which have been articulated by state agencies, that the General Assembly has been able to underwrite the costs through through revenue generation, both through a special sales tax and through an excise tax.
Okay. All right. So Tony, I'm going to let you have the last word. Do you want to respond to any of those?
I know. I think that the state of Colorado was in essence hit with a surprise whenever legalization first became their law. And so they have been a prime example of how they've had to work to catch up and be prepared for this. So in answer to your question of whether or not this is being sold back then to the state of Colorado as a social equity program, no, that it was not. Back then it was being sold as a medical use situation. Today, as the marijuana industry is now trying to expand across the country, they're throwing everything out the book on how to sell it. So, you know, it's a concern. I think that again, I cannot give our brothers and sisters in Colorado enough accolades for what they've had to put up with and what they've had to deal with, and more importantly, taking it upon themselves to expand some of their laws and some of their regulations to do their best to ensure that this thing doesn't go sideways on them. And so I say that. But in answer to another question, there was somebody from East Texas apparently wanting to know how bad it was in East Texas. In August of 2020, just last year, over 23,000 plants were seized in just one grow alone. And so is it happening in Texas? Absolutely. Are we going to be able to regulate it? I'm looking to my partners in Colorado and in Washington and in Oregon, trying to find out how it is that we can get ahead of the game here should the Texas legislature go in that direction. There's a lot of money being poured into this thing that we don't have, but it is being poured then that way. And I agree with the director in that, yes, once it's collected, you can use it for a lot of valuable things. But my biggest concern is not the money. I don't care about the money. I'm not in law enforcement, nor did I take on this position to earn that much more money or to expand the flow of money. That's not what it's about. What it's about, in my mind and in my eyes, more than anything, is the protection of our children. The protection of our children. And if it takes us to fight tooth and nail with our state legislature in Texas to avoid this from happening, then you can count me at the forefront. That's where I'll be. Beverly, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Director Burack, Director Mendiola, thank you so much. Dominique, you need to come back to San Antonio.
And you guys, there you have it. We have had a wonderful, wonderful day. And you all have. I thank you very much, because this ADAP is made up of an amazing team of people from law enforcement, behavioral health, community coalitions, youth development, faith-based groups, and public elected officials. And it is truly all about collective wisdom and problem solving. So I'm gonna put my money with Tony. I don't think this is gonna pass in Texas for a minute, and we will see. We will watch our neighbors to see how you all can perfect this in a way that truly does that may realize positive things for you. So I want to be able to turn this over very quickly, you all, to Darcel Grounds. I know I can see many of you all have been talking about the evaluations and your certificates. So Darnell, would you please close us out? We've got 1 minute, a couple of minutes left. Please close us out and let everybody know how they can get their CEUs and evaluations, please.
Thank you,
Thank
Beverly.
everybody.
And thank you, Mr. Burack and Dominique, for a great presentation, and Tony, the dialogue. I love the panel discussion. After this, you will get an email link with your evaluation. Please fill it out. When you submit it back, you will also then be emailed your CE certificate. If you do not see your link, your email, please check your spam and junk folder. Sometimes those things land in there. I put my email address in the chat. Contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us today. We wish you absolutely well. We wish everyone a great weekend. Please be safe, mask up, please wash your hands. We want you to be safe and healthy. And we wish each and every one of you all the absolute best. And we will work to bring back our guests so we can have a further discussion of this topic, since there was so much interest. Thanks each and every one of you all. God bless, and please be safe. And would the ADAP team please just stay behind for just a sec? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.